Yeah, no,
Uh, I want to go ahead and get into whataboutism. Um, I just went ahead and looked it up, and I decided to go with the Encyclopedia Britannica, just because it sounds more authoritative than Wikipedia. So it defines whataboutism, I think, very well. It's the rhetorical practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter accusation, by asking a different but related question, or by raising a different issue altogether. Whataboutism serves to reduce the perceived plausibility or seriousness of the original accusation or question by suggesting that the person advancing it is hypocritical or that the responder's misbehavior is not unique or unprecedented. Acts of whataboutism typically begin with the rhetorical questions of the form, what about? And then it gives some examples of whataboutism, which I'm not going to bother with. And then there's an etymology and origin of the term. Whataboutism is a portmanteau of what and about, suffixed with ism, meaning a distinctive practice. First known use of the term in a print publication occurred in May 1978 when The Guardian published a reader's letter accusing the British newspaper of falsely equating the despotism of the Soviet Union with that of the military dictatorships allied with the West. Whataboutism, as the reader explained, is a condition of the progressive mind which does not tolerate any criticism of communist autocracy unless those who criticize wear sackcloth and put ashes on their heads for the sins of all non communist dictatorships. That's pretty funny, actually. Whataboutism as a logical fallacy. Whataboutism responses of the counter accusation variety are considered logical fallacies as a form of tu quoque, Latin for you also, argument. They divert attention from the original criticism of a person, country, organization, or idea by returning the same criticism in response, but they have no bearing on the truth value of the original accusation. Tu quoque arguments directed specifically at individuals constitute a species of ad hominem fallacy. And then it'll get into the origin. It mentions sophists of pre-Socratic Greece, et cetera, and won't get into that. Talks about politics and whataboutism, which I won't get into because I think that's obvious. And then apparently there can be positive uses of whataboutism. Whataboutism is generally considered a negative practice because of its tendency to erode mutual trust, to polarize discussions, and to trivialize serious issues. Nevertheless, it can have tangible benefits in some circumstances. For example, whataboutism can help people to recognize inconsistencies in their own arguments or positions when the whataboutist response effectively raises a legitimate counterexample to a critical generalization. I think SKC was talking about that. It can also reveal common problematic assumptions or approaches on each side of a debate, suggesting larger issues that should be addressed. Finally, it can help people to clarify their own positions on relevant issues, which could lead both sides to revise their stances and come to a shared understanding.
you know what I think the
So,
biggest problem with whataboutism is?
what's that?
Yesterday we were talking about analogies,
Hmm.
and I think in 2015 or 2005, one of the two, they took verbal analogies off of the SAT. Disparate impact, race type things, whatever. And a lot of people can't make effective analogies. And so when they do the whataboutism, in many cases that I've found, it just doesn't fit. It's close, but it's not, it's almost perfect. to
Well,
do the what.
the SAT doesn't teach about analogies. It tests whether you understand what analogies are. So it's
Right.
not taking it off the SAT doesn't make a difference. It's whether you were taught what analogies were in the first place.
Well, they took it off because regardless if people were taught or not, some people were having a hard time figuring it out. And so they said, well, it can be somewhat biased.
Yeah, well, if they're having a hard time figuring it out, there's a problem with how they were taught.
Okay, fair enough. But anyway, to go, they took it off, right? And so we were doing a couple of analogies yesterday, and it really is a practice or exercise in deductive reasoning,
Right.
than what we did yesterday. And I think whataboutism can be effective, as the article says, if the what about is like overlays it, almost perfectly. Short of that, it's kind of some incongruency there.
Well, sometimes people make whataboutisms and really, on the surface they may seem analogous, but they actually aren't. For instance, when we talk American slavery, and I'm bringing this up for a reason because I know it'll be a hot button. American slavery was unique, and it was specifically unique because slaves were bred. Basically chattel slavery was fairly unique. I want to say Brazil might have had something like that, but I can't remember. So, when you say everywhere in the world has had, all civilizations have had slavery at one point or another, on the surface, yeah, that seems a good point, except when we talk American slavery, we're talking about a specific type of slavery that was unique. So I never buy that Thomas Sowell type argument that, slavery, is ubiquitous in human history. That might be so, but we're being very specific to American slavery. And, the other unique thing about American slavery is no one else had a U.S. Constitution that, basically, treated all men as equal under the law. I don't think other places actually, necessarily saw slaves as not human beings. There were times in American history where, it was doubted whether slaves either had, there was like polygenesis where, hey, slaves and white people don't come from the same ancestor or they just weren't. They might be they might be human-like, but they're not quite human.
If you don't mind me, can I ask you a question? 'Cause I'm not very familiar with this, and I've heard like pieces here and there. Was it 3/5? Was that saying that they're 3/5 of a man, or was it representation? I've heard both sides.
Well, it was both.
Okay.
Because if you're only 3/5 for representation, you're only 3/5 of a whole person. So it doesn't specifically say, hey, these guys are 3/5 of a man, but it's implied. If they're only good enough to count as 3/5 of a vote or of a for representation purposes, then they're not a whole person.
Now, I don't know as much about this. You probably know a bit about this. I've heard recently, probably in the last 5 or 10 years, that someone was saying,
okay, SKC, there you go with your whataboutism. No one said slavery started in America. I'm saying America had a unique system of slavery. So what about Mr. Debate Master? You're not doing very well with that whataboutism you're trying to pull. I'm sorry, John.
No, that's okay. I've heard recently, probably, and I don't think I heard this in high school, but someone said that the North and the South agreed on that 3/5. Is that true?
That is true.
Really?
As a matter of fact, the South wanted 1-to-1 representation. We want slaves to count as full votes or full, purposes of representation. there were those in the North that didn't want it. Like, hey, you know what? If they can't vote, why are they even being represented? And 3/5 was the compromise.
So is the South kind of wanted them for not out of love or anything or humanity? It was like a power play, a demographic.
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, the South, Georgia and South Carolina specifically said, you know what? We'll walk out of this sucker right now if you don't give us what we want. So they compromised on it, but both during the American Revolution, but the Constitutional Convention especially, they were like, nope. If you even question whether we're going to have slavery or not, we're out of here. Wow. So they put it in no uncertain terms, how they were going to negotiate.
Dolomite said the South was going to use slaves like the Democrats used the illegals. Yeah, from what I've heard, and again, I haven't read this anywhere, just people talking, you're confirming. It wasn't out of the kindness of their heart. It was a political play, like a.
It was a political play, but the other part of why they wanted that much representation is they wanted to make sure that they always had power in the government. So, if you count your slaves, it also counts in your representation in the House of Representatives. It also plays a part in the Electoral College.
Yeah.
So basically what they were afraid of, I think population came into it, and they were afraid that at some point the North would have more people than the South. I think that's how it went.
That was going to make sense. Go ahead. Sorry for you.
No, good morning. Stanley, I came up here to say exactly what Stanley just said, so I'm just chilling now.